also to democracy. So without further ado, you have a deep background in journalism, Susan, and which is one of the many great assets that you're bringing to Resolute Square. Can you talk to everybody a little bit about what your background is that you now bring to us?
Sure. I have spent almost 25 years in journalism. I am a Chicago native, but I've worked for papers in Iowa, covering the Iowa caucuses. And I've been in Michigan now for a little over 20 years, which I can hardly believe. But my daughter is 22, so the math adds up.
Yep.
And I've worked a lot in local media. I have done mostly political reporting. I owned Inside Michigan Politics for 5 years, which was through the Trump era. So I got to see just phenomenal changes in my home state. And I've also worked on the campaign side a bit. So that was a whole education in and of itself in 2018. And that was the year that I founded the nonprofit Michigan Advance, and we covered politics and policy in our state. And that was a really great adventure for the last 6 years. But especially as we are in this second Trump regime, I am so excited to be part of a pro-democracy organization. It's really doing something to fight back and to have these great discussions, but also be a resource for people as well.
I love that you have the experience on both sides, being a journalist covering campaigns and then being inside a campaign. I think it's a really important perspective to have, to know what it's like on the campaign side. And I'm sure you saw that it's sort of insane, but um, but mostly good insanity depending on the campaign that you're working on. So that's amazing experience that you're bringing, but it also gives you really a frame of reference for how much things have changed on the journalistic side and what we're seeing now happening to journalism and sort of being agreed to by journalists and media companies in the Trump era. Can you talk about what it's like to see that shift?
It's really remarkable. So I actually started my professional journalism career right after 9/11. I was working for the Cedar Rapids Gazette in Iowa, and um, really trying to cover such a massive um, story like that, even though it was over 1,000 miles away, but everybody in the country was affected. And unfortunately, in these 20 odd years, I've seen so many changes in journalism, and frankly, most of them have not been positive. I mean, there've just been round after round of layoffs, whole publications going under. You have communities that don't have a newspaper anymore, or it's a skeleton. Every time my husband and I go grocery shopping together, and we look at the Detroit Free Press, it gets smaller and smaller. And it's really sad to see. And in terms of political coverage, which, has really been, my forte over the years, it really seems like access journalism is, the defining, the primary um genre, which, I think a lot of people are sick of, to be honest, because you know, when you see the questions being asked at the White House briefing, I don't know any regular people out there who have those same questions.
Right.
They want to know what tariffs mean for their own lives. They want to know why, suddenly they're, paying even more for eggs now than during the Biden administration. They want to know why people are being arrested, just for having the wrong thoughts. And so I feel like there's just such a disconnect where you have people who just keep talking to themselves. And I've really, watched this rise of independent media, on Substack, and on social media. And I feel like it's a great resource for people who want to have those in-depth conversations. Like when you and I were talking with Simon Rosenberg this week, um, you and I'm sure, have both done, hits on CNN and they talk to you for 5 minutes and
Yeah,
fire off five
totally.
questions and nobody learns anything,
Yeah.
and it's fun and you take a photo and your mom is proud of you, but, you don't get into anything.
Right.
And so it's great that, like, on Lincoln Square, we can have these in-depth discussions. And who doesn't want to hear Stuart Stevens interview people and Rick Wilson's latest metaphor? It's great. And at the same time, I think it's a place for some really thoughtful commentary, which I love writing. And so I love that we're bringing everyone together and giving people a voice. And I feel like in these times when it's so easy to feel powerless out there, that holding fast to your values has never been more important. And just saying, here are facts, do with them what they will.
Mm.
I don't feel like we're in that era anymore. We need to fight back before we lose everything that we hold dear. And I'm really proud to be part of a publication that does that.
Yeah, being fearless in this time, or it's not really fearless, it's courageous. There's Murkowski saying that,
Mhm.
she was afraid and that has had an impact on the kind of work that she's doing as a senator. Um, we can't do that right now. And whether you're a member of the media or you're someone elected or you are someone just in general out there having these conversations, the difficult conversations that we have to have with people, that courage to stand up and say what needs to be said in these times is so incredibly important. And this does give us a platform to do that. Um, and a platform for people to be able to ask questions, which that's the other thing that in traditional media, there's not a lot of two-way conversation going on. And like this morning, Joe Trippi and Alex Shaslow took calls or took questions that had been submitted and did a Q&A with the people who are part of this community. And it's so important because it does keep that finger on the pulse of what people actually care about, which can get really lost inside the DC bubble. It's a weird place. Like I used to have to go to DC regularly, and even you get in conversations with the cab drivers going from whatever airport into downtown, and they're in the bubble. Like they're having conversations about, if you want to, they all want to talk politics, which is really
Right.
cool. Um, and they're super well informed, but not about the things that are going on that people care about once you get out of the greater DC area. So
Mhm.
it's wonderful to be able to have that back and forth with people here.
Yeah.
You mentioned the press conferences, the White House briefings, and I remember a time when if a journalist asked a question and got completely shut down or evaded, the person answering the question evaded um, giving a real answer to it, and their opportunity to ask the question was up, the next journalist would stand up and ask that same question. And when it was a really important issue, which we have so many right now, that politicians are very good and their spokespeople are very good at sidestepping difficult answers. But there was a level of accountability that, especially if you're going to fill the briefing room with Newsmax and OAN and right wing influencers, you're just not going to get a serious discussion, and you're not doing what the American people need you to be doing as journalists. Um, but it's scary for journalists now, both in being able to keep jobs, because you did talk about how many publications have shut down or cut back in size. How much do you think that job security and the large media corporations worrying about the wrath of Trump has to do with people pulling their punches or really not doing serious coverage at all?
I think it has a huge, amount to do with it, but, I mean, obviously, it didn't just start now. I think you've seen a general weakening of, the power of the mainstream media for a long time that allowed us to get to this place where Tim Pool is now a venerable journalist in the, White House press corps, apparently. Um, but when you have parent companies like ABC News settling a lawsuit with the president that they were going to win, and CBS News cowering with their 60 Minutes coverage, and you had the executive producer, the longtime, executive producer, saying there's
Just
too much
revered.
interference, right? In the Washington Post, where we've seen what Jeff Bezos has been doing and openly meddling, in editorial affairs, changing the entire political bent of his editorial page. That's why Eugene Robinson and Ruth Marcus, have walked out the door, along with, so much other talent. And, I understand that it's difficult to stand up in these times, but, when you have, your neighbors are willing to stand up more than a US senator, or, people who make over $1 million on cable news, that's not the way it should be. I mean, you're seeing people show up to these protests. Yesterday there were a lot of May Day protests. People are willing to put it on the line, but not so many of the people who should be leading this fight. And personally, I think the press should. I don't know how any newspaper could endorse Donald Trump when he has said that he wants to go after the First Amendment, when he wants to go after the press. Just out of pure self-interest, how could you ever endorse somebody who's willing to destroy your industry and a vital part of the Constitution that, we are sworn to uphold? So, to me, it was a really sad state of events when the Associated Press got kicked out of, Trump's events in the pool because they refused to use his Gulf of America, term, which is just silliness. But, you know, newspapers are supposed to be about facts. And not one outlet, decided to go with them because nobody wants to lose access. And that is a huge problem. And I have to say that, yes, corporations that own media, they have a responsibility, but so do journalists. It should be more important to fight for values than to lose some followers on Twitter or X.
Yeah, it should be the lack of solidarity, within journalism right now is so disappointing to see, and access journalism, um, as far as those White House press briefings go, they're n it would be one thing if you were having very substantive back and forth with the press secretary.
Mhm.
But there is no substance there. So to wanna be able to stay in that room so you can listen to dear leaders' talking points being spewed out by Caroline Leavitt, that's that's not something that you should be compromising your journalistic principles to retain access to.
Right.
It's just gross. Um, and my God, if I hear one more or read one more journalist saying that, they have really great stuff that they had held back to put in their effing books, I'm gonna
Mhm.
completely lose my shit. And, the latest one was in The Atlantic that, the editor saying, you know, hey guys, have you heard about Project 2025? It's
Mhm.
really bad. Like, I didn't look into it before the election, but now that I'm writing a book, I'm really taking a look at it, and man, it's bad. Like, are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah,
we spent the last year with our hair on fire trying to get people to pay attention to what is now being instituted, and we have really important publications who, uh, you know, I'm not going to criticize the Atlantic overall because they do incredible work and have brilliant writers who are doing really important stuff. But my God, you none of us should have been ignoring Project 2025 last year, and certainly not journalists.
right.
It was too obvious a thing that needed to be covered, and it didn't get the coverage that it should have.
You
So you talked about journalists being threatened and fearful. That's going to get worse before it gets better. And we know that because last Friday, when Pam Bondi was taking out the trash, which is
Mhm.
what people do when they have information to release and they hope the media won't cover it. And so Pam Bondi put out her memo last week that protections for journalists in leak investigations are being stripped away from them, and the government is going to be able to subpoena uh, information of confidential sources, or the journalists are going to be put in jail. This is such a departure. Can you talk a little bit about how big a departure this is from not just the Biden era, but the history of First Amendment in this country?
Right. I mean, look, journalists don't like how any administration handles the media and their approach, especially with whistleblowers and trying to keep information secret. That was true under, Bush 43, under Obama, Biden.
Nobody
But
likes leaks.
no, absolutely. And, it's our job in the media to try and get information out to the public. Sometimes those uh jobs are at odds, and that's one of the great things about a free press and democracy. But, under these guidelines, if you want to call them, that the AG just outlined, we'd never have the Pentagon Papers.
Right.
There's so much that we would never have learned about what our government did, especially like in the Nixon era. And certainly, we all know that Nixon was not a huge friend of the press. We have many, many tapes to that effect. But we're talking about really rewriting the rules, and it just goes along. You know, we're very good in the media about talking about all the attacks on us, and we don't really connect that to things writ large because the media tends to do a lot of navel gazing. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why people are sick of the media.
Yeah.
But honestly, how this fits in perfectly with just snatching people off the street,
Yeah.
because we think that they're criminal people who are undocumented. We're not going to do our homework on it, but they fit the bill. So let's try this. When everybody's rights start being swept under the rug, of course, the press is going to be targeted. All institutions, our foreign aid institutions, like USA, that got crippled. It seems like anyone who is potentially a check on the power of the Trump administration, that's a threat in some way, you can't feel like your rights are sacrosanct right now. And that's a very dangerous place to be.
That's such an important point because I want to read um, just one sentence from the Bondi memo. This Justice Department will not tolerate unauthorized disclosures that undermine President Trump's policies, victimize government agencies, and cause harm to the American people. Not national security,
Right.
Not the things that we normally think of that, there's a line, when should
Mhm.
this information be? And the press can be actually very good about that with administrations, and they have held
Mhm.
information that they knew. We just saw that with Signalgate, that
Right.
those uh, bombing plans were not released prior to them being carried out, even though the reporter knew that these
Mhm.
things were going to happen. And you do that because you don't put lives
Right.
at risk. But the president's policies as a reason to go after journalists
Mhm.
is a whole new level of
Right.
corruption, to be jailing journalists because they're interfering with policies that a
Mhm.
certain administration wants to put in place.
Right. I mean, basically, I'm not a lawyer, but I think a layperson's interpretation of that is if you're mean to dear President Trump, you can be thrown in jail. And so certainly those of us at the Lincoln Square would qualify on a daily basis.
Sure.
And that's a dangerous place to be, but it's everyone. You write a story where there is any critical voice of what the administration is doing under this policy, you could go to jail. And
Sure.
so at what point do we no longer have a free and independent media?
Yeah, and it's at this point, it's up to the courts, and it's up to enough people standing up and saying, "We're going to do," journalists, members of the media saying, "We're doing it anyway because
Mhm.
it's the right thing to do," and just American citizens demanding that this is a precious right that we have. It's a reason. There's a reason it's the First Amendment
Right.
in our Bill of Rights. It's a pretty big damn deal. So, um, yeah, it's very worrying to see what they're doing, but not terribly shocking. I, I think, with the exception of some people who supported Pam Bondi's nomination, who I was fairly shocked to see did. Um, I think the rest of us knew what was coming if Trump put
Mhm.
somebody like Pam Bondi in as AG, and there's going to be more. It won't just be the press, but
Right.
she's coming after everybody who gets in the way of
Right.
President Trump's policies, or did in the first administration, or said mean things about him when he was out of office. It's, all of a piece. So we have a lot of work here to do at Lincoln Square. It's not going to end anytime soon. So can you tell us, as you take over as executive editor, what is your vision for this media outlet?
I'm just so excited. There's so much potential for us to do so much good here. And I love what you and Stuart and Joe and Rick and everyone here has built. I think we have just such fantastic, thought-provoking articles every day. Um, and now it's great because, you know, you get to see more of everyone that you love and respect doing interviews with other people that you want to hear from. And so that's just been great with being on Substack and being able to do these lives. And so, on it's easy to say I want to do more on that front, and we will. But I think also, we want to bring in more voices, and we want to hear more from all of you who are a part of our community and what you're interested in. And we want to be a huge resource in these times that are so perilous, because it's so easy to feel alone and to feel powerless, and that's exactly what authoritarians always want you to feel.
Right.
But we're not. We're Americans. They have not conquered us. And there is still time to fight back, and this is the window to do so. And so I think bringing those resources and those voices, and also having some joy, having some fun, even in these times, is important. It's important to laugh at, when you're watching Rick Wilson's podcast, because we all need a break. So, and I definitely think that we can, bring some more voices that, can take a different, tack and
Mhm.
have a different perspective on things and bring a little more perspective, hopefully people who are a little younger, maybe not as politically involved as all of
Yeah.
us are here, what their take is on how we can fight all this. So I'm really looking forward to bringing those people into the fold and doing more. And of course, continuing to have Lisa on because she's just such a resource.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you. I
Oh,
am. I didn't. I knew this was going to be a difficult role to fill because we're a small organization and you wear a lot of hats, and not everybody wants to wear a lot of hats and not everybody can do it well, and I know you can. So I am thrilled that you are the person who is going to have the reins here very shortly. And everybody, do keep the comments coming. Let us know what you want to see more of, what information you need, how much more of our gallows humor you can tolerate, because yes, we laugh a lot, but it tends to be a little dark. but but that's okay. It gets us through the day. Um, and we'll keep rolling out more stuff for you. And definitely, you're going to be seeing a lot more of Susan because she's going to be doing more of the interviewing here with her journalistic background. I'm really excited to be able to watch those and read her writing because she is a fantastic writer, and has a piece out this week on the platform. So please do check out her writing, tune in for the lives, and keep your voices raised, not just to everyone else, but to us, and let us know what it is you continue to need more of from us so we can deliver for you. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
thank you.